You're listening to Zeros on Heroes with Mike Mercadal. Hey everybody, welcome to Zeros on Heroes. My name is Mike Mercadal. I am your host. Thank you to everybody who's been liking and sharing and subscribing and writing reviews. We appreciate all of you, and thank you for people who have told me ways to improve the show. I really appreciate that because I want it to be as good as possible. And thank you for everyone who's been coming out to the live shows at the Creek in the Cave in Long Island City, Queens, every Thursday at 8 p.m. Unsung Heroes. That's right. It's a show that's essentially an open mic talk show with all of the hilarious New York comedians that hang out at the Creek in the Cave. And you can be on. You don't have to have a comedy background or anything. We've had drunk randos just appear and be on the show, and sometimes it's a win, sometimes it's not. But either way, it's fun listening, and if you're subscribed to this, you're subscribed to that. So you get all of these shows on the Zeros on Heroes podcast feed. New shows coming soon. Stay tuned. Be sure to subscribe and also share with your friends. It's word of mouth. If you enjoy what we're doing, give it a share, give it a retweet, and follow us at Zeros on Heroes on all social media and Zeros on Heroes on Facebook. It's all there for you to enjoy. In our continuing New York City Comic-Con coverage, I got to sit down with the directors and the lead actress of it's an independent film that feels way more complete. You know, like indie gets this weird vibe. It is a dope science fiction, kind of visceral science fiction. I don't know what you would call it, but it's called Prospect. And it was something I was not aware. Again, something I learned about in the lead up to doing press for New York Comic Con, and I knew I had to jump on. It's pretty amazing what they've done, and it was great to sit down. I thought it was going to be a roundtable session. Turns out it was a press conference style. So there's going to be a couple audio things that I'm going to be jumping in and out of the interview because you couldn't really hear the people asking questions. So I'll be popping in to kind of clarify what they were asking and what they were talking about. And I got to sit down with lead actress Sophie Thatcher, which is going to be the hardest to hear. Unfortunately, she was too far away from the microphone, but and then the directors, filmmakers, the creators of this sci-fi world, Chris Caldwell and Zeke Earl, and they were really inspiring in the sense that this felt like a real labor of love, like kind of a passion project that they chose to kind of build out a world for this movie to take place in. And it was super interesting. It also stars Pedro Pascal, so there'll be a couple questions about him. You know him from Game of Thrones and Narcos and all that stuff. He's Kingsman, The Golden Circle. He was in that too. But yeah, it was a super fun interview, very interesting. And it was interesting to hear the passion behind an independent creator, as I am also an independent creator of things. And it was pretty inspiring. Let's start it off. The first question is, you weren't able to hear, so I cut it out. But the first question is, this was originally a short, and they kind of brought it out into a feature, and talks a little bit about that process.
Sorry. Well, it was a 4-year process, which was, like an emotional roller coaster. We're first-time film directors. We're just trying to get people to trust us with lots of money to make a movie. But in retrospect, I'm really glad it took so long because we rewrote the script 3 or 4 times. We used that time to pour more detail into this original sci-fi world, make more concept art, really think things out. And I think it's a much, much better movie because of that long incubation period.
The next question was about having practical sets and real props and the desire to have that experience as an indie film and any difficulties that it may have brought to the production.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was definitely one of the very intentional strategic angles we took for the film, even from the time we were making the short. And in the short film, we were able to kind of establish a lot of the flavor of the world and kind of the basic premise. But one of the things we set out to do with this film was to see how far we could push an indie level budget in the space of the practicals, like the production design manifested in real physical objects and the suits, the costumes, the props, the sets. And so that's kind of one of the kind of behind the scenes aspirations of the film, was to do an indie sci-fi work that kind of, was trying to get at that classic Star Wars feel, the Alien, the kind of sci-fi films that aren't in front of green screens that you feel like you can reach out and touch and hold on to. So.
Next, I turn the question over to Sophie as to how working with Pedro Pascal and the practical effects and the sets and the props and all that stuff, how that impacted her performance, especially working with a much more seasoned actor in a very real world environment.
Well, it made it easier with the spacesuit, actually. It was hard at first, just getting used to it, but like a couple weeks in, I became accustomed to the helmet and the visor. Once I put the helmet on, it felt like I was like delving into this universe of prospects. And working with Pedro was amazing. At first, I was a bit intimidated by him because it was my first feature and I was just feeling things out. But we became really close, and as the story progresses, our characters become close too. So that happened kind of organically.
For the cat,
freak out not trying to scratch your, not being able to scratch your nose.
I mean, the helmets were like,
I got really used to it. Yeah,
they were a really unique challenge for like the whole cast, and I don't know if we have the record, but we've got to be close to kind of like the most lines of dialogue recorded like in a completely enclosed helmet.
I want someone to figure that out.
Yeah. Which, it's a challenge for the actors because, their voices are bouncing around in their heads, and we had to kind of develop a lot of interesting ways to kind of accommodate that. You quickly realize why so many science fiction films try to get their characters out of helmets as quickly as possible. I mean, essentially, when by the end of it, we had pit crews for each actor where after every time that we yelled cut, the visor would come off, they'd be wiping it down with anti-fog. There's all kinds of like ventilation happening.
F1 pit team, just getting in there, like with the way the costume's so complicated. But yeah, every time I see a YouTube comment, even on the trailer, they're like, wait, they don't take their helmets off in this movie. I'm like, yes, we didn't. We suffered.
The next questions I'll lump together just because the answers were so short. But basically, how did they get Pedro Pascal involved? And what was it like to be the jacks of all trades when it came to creating this film as writers, directors, set designers, production, all that stuff done in-house, just done between the two of them?
He just really connected with the script. He really liked the language, which I got to hand credit to Chris for kind of inventing this really original vernacular that's from this world, and he just kind of loved that challenge to like take on the words. I mean, really, we just don't know any better. I mean, Chris and I ran a small commercial production company in Seattle, and we just made ads together and then made short films, and it sort of organically grew, and it's just what we've always done. So we've just kind of built this very specific co-directing relationship that allows me to run the camera and kind of design the visual world and kind of, jump in and out. So it's just kind of like, I'm not sure we know how to do it any other way.
Next, they were asked about their influences and whether or not they were influenced by modern sci-fi or whether or not they were drawn more to the classics.
Absolutely. I mean, aesthetically, a lot of inspiration drawn from the classics, from like what we said, Star Wars, Alien, Blade Runner, that kind of like aesthetic. But we are very excited and hope to kind of be participating in kind of this more I guess, what was the word you used? This kind of more intellectual science fiction, I suppose. One of the things that we were really striving to do with this film was to kind of capture that feeling of immersion, where you don't hold the viewer's hand, you don't hold the audience's hand through the world. It's not putting a lot of words in the character's mouth that are explaining what's happening in bits of the world. We wanted that to be evident through the density of the details in the production design, where you pick up bits and pieces and piece together the feeling that this is an interconnected, alive world, and we're just watching, we're observing this part of it. And so I think, if anything, that's one of the things we were trying to do is the experiences you kind of get put in over your head, and then you kind of have to piece together, what this world is comprised of.
Next question was for Sophie about any difficult stunts she had to do on set.
Oh, we had that one stunt that we prepared forever, and there was this other stunt that you guys asked if I could do it, but I wanted to stay safe, so I chose not to.
Yeah, all of our stunts were really tricky because of the helmets and because of the visors. And you did a lot of them. You did a lot of the tussling around, for sure, a lot of the following. But we also had a stunt double because it's just, you got to be really careful with the helmet getting jarred around.
So Prospect has actually been nominated for a few awards at different film festivals and actually won at South by Southwest. And the next question was about how excited the guys were for their film to get a wide distribution and theatrical release?
It's kind of it's no guarantee that a movie our size gets a theatrical release. So we're just like totally taken aback, totally floored. It's coming out to LA and New York November 2nd, and then it's going to go wider all around the US November 9th. And I just assumed that, this will just kind of go to streaming, and that's cool. But to get a theatrical release is really special, and we're so excited.
Up next, we hear about the visual effects process and the time and process in which they got a prospect to look as good as it does. And if you've seen the trailer, which I highly recommend everybody do, it does look amazing.
How much time? The VFX was a very we didn't hire a really big company. It was just kind of some friends of ours in Seattle that took this on as a passion project, and we were actually able to work on the spaceships during pre-production, so we had a really long time to get that right. The movie takes place on a toxic alien moon, so there's toxic dust in literally every exterior shot, and we were very insistent on doing that in a very practical way, so we actually shot dust for a really miserable day in my basement. We tried it in a few studios and it didn't work. My basement was small enough. You got the right airflow, so it's very particular dust, and then it was painstakingly layered into every shot, and it took months and months and months, and I don't think that any big movie would take the time to do that because it was a ridiculous workflow. But I think we have it has a really kind of organic feel to it that I'm really proud of.
So Jay Duplass is also in this movie, and I asked Zeke, the director, what it was like to direct Jay Duplass on set.
Jay Duplass, you don't direct him. He's such a pro. He was, he's a director, and it's kind of a dream as a first-time director to be someone with so experienced with him because he's so empathetic to you as a filmmaker. On the second day of shooting, I was operating the camera in a very tight spaceship set. I was sweating. This is my first feature film. My mind's racing. I'm just trying to remember everything. And he just looks at me and says, "Hey, dude, stop. You're getting dehydrated. You need to drink water, and you're not going to have time to go get water. You need to ask someone to get you water." This is not what I'm thinking about. But he was completely right. So he more or less was a mentor on set for those first couple of weeks.
I think part of why he took the project too was he connected with kind of the DIY spirit of everything, because on his first films he was the camera op, the boom op, and the director and the cinematographer all at the same time. And there's a bit of that spirit in Prospect as well.
Up next, another twofer. Sophie was asked about a very strong tonal shift early in the film and how her performance was affected by the parts of the shoot that they were allowed to do chronologically. And then also how impactful music is in terms of setting the tone and setting the scene and kind of building out character.
Well, that was the hardest part, I think, trying to gracefully portray her character arc, because she obviously starts off as more timid, and as she grows and is forced to be with Ezra, she kind of starts standing up for herself and speaks for herself, and that was one of my favorite parts. And reading the script, that's kind of what drew me in, just the complexity of her character arc.
And significantly, that was one of the things that we were able to shoot chronologically, and so I think it kind of worked really nicely.
Yeah.
Where
and I remember leaving the set, going back home, feeling more confident that I had.
But you got to go through that transition, because you were getting to know Jay, and then there was sort of the passing of the guard, and then Pedro carried through the rest of the production. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
I was listening to my own music usually.
We did. So those are custom-made headphones for the movie. We did have a little Bluetooth wireless thing that Sophie could wire in her own music between takes and stuff, which was pretty cool. So the music is all it's not original. We didn't have the time and money to compose all these original pop songs. So kind of what I would do is I'd try to find pop music kind of from the 70s, 80s, and 60s from other countries. Oh, I'm so sorry. From other countries. And so and generally on YouTube, I just go I put in Turkish pop music 70s, and then just go on a kind of a rabbit hole where you keep clicking. You get out of English at some point. It's just all language I don't know, and you're just kind of listening to things. And I think we found some really cool stuff that way. And then we had to, of course, hire it's Dan.
supervisor.
A music supervisor who then was like, I gave all these crazy song tunes and like, hey, can you find these licenses? And he's like, he said it's the worst job he's ever had. And then he came up with some ideas too, like just based off that stuff that worked, and he did an amazing job on the film.
But these details, like having evidence of pop music, evidence of like a civilization that like we're out in the wilderness, but we wanted it to feel like, you know, they were out in the wilderness to something, you know, that there was a culture out there. And so part of it was trying to like to weave this thread of like something that felt alien but also familiar in a lot of ways, and we wanted it to feel like pop music. And I think it sort of settled into a lot of like Eastern European and Asian sort of twists on American genres in a lot of ways, and so you kind of get that sort of intermixed sort of alien
I feel
feel.
like music was also really important to C's character, as it served as an escape for her and created like a disconnect from reality, and for a little place she could just go somewhere else.
Yeah, that escapism.
Yeah.
From a technical aspect, Zeke was asked about post-production and color grading and what an impact shooting on location and the locations they chose had on the film.
No, the color grading was a huge part of the creative process for me. I sat in on all the color days, and we got like 2 solid weeks kind of spread out so we could create a look, spend some time, come back to it. And yeah, I mean, I think it was like we looked at a lot of like the original Hasselblad photography from the early Apollo missions, and trying to get kind of that texture. Like it's a very digital movie, but we wanted to kind of pull in some of that kind of, you know, retro kind of texture. And then kind of the other thing was that there was the blue rule, which was that for the most part only Sophie's suit was allowed to have a strong blue presence, and we try to kind of take that out of the rest of the film. So it's a very like harsh world that they have to survive, but it's very warm and kind of beautiful, and we wanted to kind of play with that contrast.
What's your film location?
The toxic alien forest is the Olympic rainforest, the Hoh rainforest specifically, which is in Washington State. It's a beautiful, amazing location, and then the interiors were shot in Seattle.
And we shot a lot of the feature in the exact same locations, like down to the tree that we shot the short film in, because we developed this relationship with a private land trust out there that had some old growth forest, and it's a place that we grew up hiking. It was kind of a part of the conception of the film. Was, you know, one of the first steps was, going to college together and going out and like backpacking out in these forests, and it was just like, we got to make a sci-fi film set here because it's so insane.
Hoping that Prospect is a huge success and they continue to make more films set in this world, I asked him about if they'd even planned for that.
Yeah, I mean, through the development of Prospect, we kind of started making our own like Wikipedia, because it's like you introduce a new kind of subculture or a new character, and you got to figure out their backstory and where they're from, and the economics of everything are really important to us. We want to make sure it like kind of makes sense from an economic standpoint. So I feel like we actually have already fleshed out kind of the whole Offworld that you don't see in the film, and yeah, we're ready to tell more stories there.
Yeah, when you establish a world, you hope to be able to kind of, capitalize on it for as many like storytelling opportunities as you can. There were like bits of scripts or even drafts of like full drafts of scripts that we had worked on that kind of were set in the same universe, maybe at a different time period. And some of these ideas we're hoping to kind of coalesce and capitalize on as a television series or some other form of that. But yeah, it's definitely kind of a vibe and an aesthetic that we would like to tell more stories within.
Here they were asked about their biggest challenges when it came to creating a special effect or a specific shot for the movie.
I think the main thing is we were very committed to doing it on location, in a real rainforest, primarily shooting with natural light. So kind of like, everyone is checking like 3 different weather forecasts like on the hour, and there was we actually went to this location because we hoped it would be overcast. It's just out of Forks, Washington, where the Twilight series is set, because the vampires like don't like the sun. But we went out there and we got this freakish like 2 weeks of sunshine. So like there's this one scene, it's actually Pedro Pascal's first scene, where we were scheduling the shots like by the hour as the sun would shift through the trees, and it was just a huge like logistic nightmare. But I think it really pays off to be in like a real natural location like that.
And part of it was by necessity and the limitations of our budget as well. We had to be nimble because we were out there. We couldn't be hauling all kinds of lighting equipment out there, so it was a lot of light modification and just using the natural light and dealing with it to get it done.
due to the nature of us recording at this open hall in Comic-Con, there was some audio issues. But Sophie was asked about being 16 while filming this movie and what it was like to transfer her skills from theatrical acting to cinematic film acting.
Yeah, it took me a while to be able to. Is with musical theater. That's what I studied in high school. It's so out there. And then with acting on screen, it's so natural, and that's what I like about it. It feels so much more real, and I don't know, it transforms me into this universe when it feels so real. So that's what I gravitated towards, and that's when I was like, I kind of want to do more film. Obviously, it's harder to get into that, but
I think we didn't even... Not to cut you off.
No.
I think we didn't even fully realize like what we were getting into in terms of risk. Just she's in every single scene of the movie. She was shooting every single day of our 40-day long production. It's out in the middle of the woods with a helmet. And I think we benefited from her theater grit, from just like grinding it out in theater, being able to just be pro. And particularly with casting a minor in a lead role, we got lucky with Sophie.
Thank you.
The next question was about Pedro Pascal's character's specific manner of speaking in Prospect, but it really just turned into a conversation about how dope Pedro Pascal is and his immense talents.
God, that guy's so stupid talented. He tried out like a few takes on us, but he really owned that character. Like you never quite knew what he was going to do when you were going to call action. Like he surprised us on a continual basis, and such like he's hilarious. He keeps getting like cast in all this like big action stuff, but like at any point if he wants to do comedy, like because he'd have like the entire crew like cracking up right before a take, you'd yell action, and then he's like murdering someone, and you're like terrified. He can just like turn it on like that.
I mean, as far as the accent was concerned, it was just kind of a little bit of kind of more just feeling it out experimentation. I think the language, because it's so weird, sort of dictated a lot of that, and you couldn't just like deliver it in plain speech because there's so much like messing with vocabulary that's going on, and so it kind of needed something to fuse it all together.
How about a sales pitch to mainstream sci-fi audiences? That's what these guys were asked for next.
I don't know. I feel like a lot of it, I mean, I don't know. I think part of it is sort of acknowledging the achievement in terms of the budget. I think that's one of the things that, like, when we're kind of in the mix with all the big, like, superhero movies and blockbusters, I mean, we're very excited about that opportunity. At the same time, it's very much at its roots, in its DNA, it's an indie film that's trying to stretch the dollar.
It's an indie movie made by people who, like, are in love with science fiction. So, like, it's like, we had, like, the budget of like half of a Marvel fight scene, but like we pushed it as far as we could, and I think people who like love science fiction, love like Alien and Blade Runner and like a lot of the stuff from the 70s and 80s will kind of see where we're coming from.
I mean, our production design team was comprised of people from all different backgrounds. These are people in Seattle where there's not like a strong established film production design industry, so a lot of people had more experience designing, as industrial engineers or mechanics or carpenters or cosplayers. We had a bunch of cosplayers like in our production design shop because we were kind of like drawing from like a diversity of skill sets, and it really was kind of the collective effort of this passionate team. I think it brought a lot of interesting perspectives because we really wanted the production design to have kind of a utilitarian heft to it, and so having a lot of people that were designing products in the real world sort of bringing their ideas to the table as opposed to people who have more experience just purely in a prop situation. But it was very much kind of a homegrown passion.
It's like people who would be like fans of the film were like making the film. And like the vibe during pre-production was like amazing. It's like, I don't know if I'll ever get to do anything so much fun where you just have this like family of people. No one's made a movie before, and you have like 7 months, this hard deadline to make a gazillion spaceships, suits, guns, everything. And I want to point out, we threw on tables here. This is an in-world kind of artifact. This is a prospecting catalog.
And
I think there's more too if you run out. But more or less, this is like an advertisement for people who would potentially want to prospect in this universe, and it just kind of shows you the level of world building and props and detail that we got to go into.
There's an element of Prospect that includes drug addiction and kind of substance abuse, and that was addressed in the film. And Zeke, the director, was asked to expand on that.
Yeah, I mean, for us, the starting point was just kind of part of the world building process where, like, it was very important to us that space travel in this universe is not glamorous, it's not easy, it takes a really long time in really uncomfortable conditions, and you have these just kind of blue-collar people going out to try to make a better life for themselves, and so it's just kind of a very natural thing. It's like, long-haul truckers. It's like there's all sorts of substances, caffeine, whatever, that, you kind of use to get through it, and so, like, for C's dad, this is not his first trip like this, and over the years of doing these kind of jobs, it's just seemed a very natural thing that he'd be kind of get addicted to these substances.
It's kind of a borderline addiction that accumulates over time, and just the habits of when you're spending, because in our minds, you're spending weeks if not months on these long haul like space journeys, and so you have to figure out a way to get through it. It's all cramped, it's very just uncomfortable, and so yeah, it's kind of to represent kind of that grind and how it just like was wearing him down.
The directors also discussed the efforts to be as scientifically accurate as possible.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd say it's not like interstellar level hard sci-fi, but trying to maintain a believable world is something that's really important to us. I actually we got a Facebook message the other week. It wasn't even a comment, it was a direct Facebook message being like, how do they defecate in the suits? And I was like, yes, I love that people are thinking that through. And actually, it's like not in the film, it's not part of the plot, it's not explained, but we had like colostomy bags like on like the side of the belts that were even kind of squishy if you felt them. And it's like we really like wanted to like think through every aspect and try to be as true to that as possible, because I think that's what makes it the most engaging world and the most kind of tense, thrilling narrative.
I'm going to watch the film differently now. I'm not sure if it's going to change the way you watch this movie, but there are poop bags on the spacesuits. Man, these guys thought of everything. Well, let's hear some of their literary influences.
I mean, my favorite growing up was like Dune, like kind of that like classic stuff. Yeah, I don't know where you.
I mean, I've been digging into Foundations recently, just because it's sort of relevant to some of the ideas we're trying to play with some future stuff. One that always stuck out to me from kind of like adolescence was Dan Simmons' Hyperion.
Yeah,
just because
awesome.
It was like, it's also just kind of this roulette of all these different crazy ideas, and when you're interacting with them for the first time, you have like, what was it, that American poet that was like out, and he had his like portal house where like every room like went to a different space, but like, yeah.
This is an indie feature, so of course we had to ask about the budget. How small it was. How did you get that money? If you've ever wanted to shoot your own indie, listen up.
So we, a kind of big part of it is that this gets a little industry inside, but we like had our own line producer from doing commercials, and we actually built the budget totally from scratch. Like any traditional industry person stepping in would have told us our movie was impossible. And so Bryce Budke, who's another college friend of ours, came from Microsoft, just kind of reinvented a way of doing this budget, and it was really laborious, but it had to, it included a lot of unusual things. We bought our own CNC machine, there was budgets for tools like glue, it was got very, very nitty gritty, and we had to prove to financiers that this wasn't just a stupid idea. And the script, which we rewrote 4 times, we rewrote the budget 10 times to get to that part. So it was a big process.
We were asking for a lot, and a lot of it was kind of unprecedented in the sense that's and we want 40 days of production, and we want 7 months to a year of lead time to build all the props and sets and costumes. And in our minds, it's this is a great deal because we're doing it all for this much money. The flip side is we need the time to execute it, and so that was a challenge in terms of pitching people. I think there was a lot of established financing entities that would hear some of these numbers and just be nope.
We got laughed out of a lot of rooms. Not literally, but people oh, you want to do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
But we eventually found Braun up in Vancouver, who kind of bought the whole story that we were trying to sell and let us do it. So.
Of course, with a small budget comes with creative problem solving. They talked about that next.
I mean, there's a lot of efficiencies born out of this kind of warehouse thing. Part of it was that we took out a year-long lease on a warehouse, and became our production offices. In pre-production, it was the shop where all the props and costumes were built. Then in production, it transitioned into the stage because we had built the sets there, and so we just shot them there. We did some like DIY soundproofing measures to like make that work out, and then it became our post-production studio. One of the cool bits was that because we're editing in the shop and we have the set sitting outside, and so we'd be like cutting together the scene where they land and be like, oh, we could really use this insert that we don't have. We'd put someone in a sleeve, walk out 50 feet into the warehouse, we'd shoot it, and then just throw it into the cut. And so we were doing we were able to do a lot of continuous pickup shooting just because
fix a lot of our mistakes.
Yeah, we were editing in the building that contained all the sets and costumes and props and stuff too. So
up next, I asked about getting the word out and any kind of creative PR and promotion that they were doing. This is a nuts and bolts kind of stuff, but if you've ever created a project, or I don't know if you can tell, the spirit of DIY is really strong with this film and these guys, and I cannot support that enough. But there's a lot of curiosities in terms of how do you build it? How do you if you build it, they will come. How do you let them know you build it? So we talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't quite started yet, but we're really excited to be working with Dust, which is a big like sci-fi Facebook page, and we've been working with them on creating a lot of like unusual kind of in-world like additional materials and artifacts and videos. So they're going to be rolling out a constant stream of like content that I'm really excited about that'll kind of expand the world of the film.
I think these little catalogs are kind of a good example. We like sort of building out in-world artifacts, and we just had we have a bunch of material. We had a bunch of like logos that we developed that we didn't, that don't get a ton of screen time in the film, and there's just kind of, this whole world that we wanted to flesh out, and we wanted to feel like go forth, go west, young man, sort of go.
You'll notice even in the trailer, like Sophie half the time wears this just like gray sweatshirt with a cartoon character, and we had to like kind of build out a cartoon show, and we actually wanted to what are the other characters, and we drew a few of them, and you'll see there's ads done by this cartoon character throughout that catalog as well.
Having this comparison with Love, it feels like Firefly in the sense. I don't know if you guys were fans of the show, when there was this world that was the next step was already kind of planned out. It feels like you guys are very thorough in kind of building this world. It's not a question. I'm just excited to
see for sure. Yes.
I really was getting some total Firefly vibes, and that's high compliment from me. I really do love Firefly, and this does feel like a dark version of that, and it has a lot of that lived-in world feel. Up next, they talk about co-directing and the friction that comes from that, or lack of. Who knows?
Between the two of us, I'd actually say Prospect, for me at least, was probably the most harmonious our co-directing relationship has ever been, because it was so hard and so exhausting that to have another person with you through that process is awesome. I totally recommend it. It's like we really just kind of relied on each other. We needed each other, through that process.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is a factor of habit, and just the fact that we run a business together. We've been shooting commercials together. It's sort of, this is our first feature, and so we don't really know any other way, and this is kind of just what everything has been culminating.
There was one big argument on set. There was a scene where Sophie's filter was running low, and I'm like, she should push this button a bunch of times. We built these cool buttons. She should push the button. And Chris is like, no, she shouldn't push the button. And we argued about that for 5 minutes, and then we didn't use the footage at all.
It was arbitrary button pushing. It didn't make sense in that situation.
Which is maybe a reset thing,
do? I don't.
It made sense.
Here's another answer to another budget question, but this time how it relates to a low budget affecting creativity and forcing new creative solutions.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a two-sided coin there. I think work, I've always found that restrictions, in a lot of ways make creativity, finding inspiration even easier in some ways, because it sort of focuses your vision. Obviously, once you kind of get off to the races, then all you want is more money to do all the things that you want to do. But
I think the distinction is that this movie was like built to be inexpensive. Like it's not like we were taking some story and then like figuring out how to do it cheap. It's like we were thinking from, I mean, Chris and I wrote it, we were thinking while we were writing, like what are the implications like on set. So it was very much designed to be that way.
And I would encourage people who are trying to get their first feature off the ground or get into filmmaking to be thinking, you know, financially as well, to be strategic with kind of the creative development, because everything is interconnected. And you know, that we were palpably aware that the only way we got a shot at doing something like this was if it was very economical. So.
Up next, the conversation turned towards the idea of other mediums. Could the stories of Prospect and the world it's set in be told in other ways? And of course, it being New York Comic Con, the idea of comic books came up.
Not super familiar with the publishers.
Yeah, I know there's been some talk about kind of comic books. We actually the concept artist for the film is a very talented illustrator by the name of Laurie Greasley, and he actually comes more from the comic book world. So we've actually been talking like comic book ideas with him. He's a very like detailed aesthetic that like really helped us like flesh out the production design. So it'd be very exciting if we were able to do that.
If you haven't seen his work, you should check it out. It's Laurie Greasley again, and he was very much a part of the core early concepting team, and he influenced a lot of what became the designs of the suits and all the stuff.
Earlier in the part of the audio that got messed up, the Miyazaki and the Studio Ghibli films were brought up as inspirations, and the directors were asked to expand a little on that.
Oh man,
I mean, Miyazaki is kind of one of those where, when part of the conception of this is it's all driven by a young female protagonist, and when you kind of look at the swath of material, that Miyazaki films are the ones that have that, and so that was kind of a natural thing. And then it was retrospective to discover that like Nausicaa had like a very similar vibe with like the toxic spores and stuff floating in the air.
I mean, Akira gets bounced around a lot with the 80s aesthetic. We love Cowboy Bebop and some of that similar kind of space western vibe.
Mm-hmm. I'd like at some point to, maybe even go a little harder in the stylization similar to Cowboy Bebop, because they have that real, like, slick kind of vibe to it, which would be fun.
Chris and Zeke were then asked about what they were working on next.
So Chris and I are in development with Amazon on a TV show that's also science fiction that we can't say too much about at this point, but where Prospect is a little more Western, it actually leans a little more medieval sci-fi. So hopefully, that happens.
Yeah, we've kind of found ourselves, like, we didn't set out explicitly to be science fiction filmmakers. We kind of fell into it, and we're very happy in it. I think kind of the through line is really the world building element of it, is really wanting to, there's something very exciting about crafting something from the ground up. And, as kids, we were inspired by a lot of science fiction and fantasy properties. And what you get from that is like just the density of the lore and really getting lost in it. And we wanted to kind of capture some of that feeling and just like being completely immersed in something.
It's really the world building opportunity. I mean, we really see world building itself as an art form, and the ability to like make kind of images and tones and atmospheres on kind of a clean slate is just kind of like one of the most fun, exciting things. Mm-hmm.
This directing duo has a few projects that were short films and that were released before and did well. And this Prospect was originally a short film that they turned into a feature. The guys were also asked if they would take any of their other short film projects and build them out into features.
Oh man,
I don't know. We tried to write that. Yeah. And it was tricky. That one was never. In the Pines was our first short film. It's about. It's kind of a little bit more experimental and about a girl who's trying to get abducted by aliens. We definitely came up with a really cool alien concept when we were fleshing out the feature, but we couldn't really get everything to jam together. I bet that alien comes up somewhere else.
Yeah,
we should use that. Alien. But that one was never. That one was always kind of a standalone thing, and it sort of felt like forcing it to make it into a feature.
I then asked if they could tell us, without any spoilers, about a scene that they thought came together so well that it was greater than the sum of its parts, better than they had originally planned for it. Of course, that would involve some kind of spoilers, and you can listen to them dance around and try not to give anything away.
That has to give something.
That has to give something away.
There's an operation that
there's a scene that it's just Sophie and Pedro Pascal, and it was the scene. I guess what I can say about it is we shot a lot of different angles of this scene, and when we got into editing, we just kind of played out one angle. It's a very uncut shot, and Sophie and Pedro's performance is just like amazing, and we didn't even realize it on the day. It wasn't until we got into the editing room we're like, oh my gosh, we actually captured something here, and like I feel like I can't take credit for it. Like they just brought it that day.
Another scene I really like is just when they land on the planet. It was something that, you know, I think Apollo 13 was one of the most influential films of mine growing up, and just sort of like driving in that really grounded sort of like how scary space is, and just kind of the, you know, 60s level of technology, using that to interact with something so insane. And we wanted to kind of capture some of that, where it's not like, you know, cut to exterior and then now you're on the moon. We wanted to sort of have that experience in more or less real time, and like sit with someone as they're careening down to the surface. And so that was something that was really important to me, and I'm very happy with how it turned out.
There's this one scene where C opens up to Ezra about her interest in this book, and that's actually what I used to audition with, and I really just love that monologue. That's where you get to see another side, and she opens up to Ezra, and that's definitely my favorite.
And she had to do it like in continuous, like 5-minute takes,
and it was a whole
in the helmet,
monologue.
Hiking and like suffocating.
That might have been one of the hardest.
And she still totally owned it.
Thank you.
And of course, it wouldn't be Zeros on Heroes if I didn't ask them what they nerd out about and what they wanted to see at the con.
What?
What do you want to check out?
Oh, who are you talking about? Us?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I really dig like action figurines, especially artists who are doing like original stuff. So there's a few people that I kind of have marked that I'm going to go check out. I like Artist Alley is like super cool.
Yeah,
like,
that's what I've been hearing.
Like I love the. I mean, as much as like I'm fans of the big movies, to me, what's exciting is seeing like what the original stuff like kind of on the ground level is.
That's where the press conference ended. We got shuffled off by the PR people. We had to take some pictures and do some stuff. And you don't need to know any of that. What you do need to know is that Prospect opens nationwide November 9th. And man, it was good. And it had talking to these guys, there was such a spirit of DIY, like the crafting something. The film, you could tell, was like like all the details were on purpose, and it had this intense focus, and you could tell the scope was so much larger, but the story was very focused. And to be honest with you, that's kind of what I wanted from the Star Wars anthology movies. You know, tell a hyper focused story in an already established. I'd let these guys do it. They should get these guys to make a Star Wars movie. If you're listening, Lucasfilms and Kathleen Kennedy, let these guys make a Star Wars movie. That sounds like a great idea. The film Prospect opens nationwide November 9th. If you're listening to this after then, go see it. Find it anywhere you can get your hands on it legally. Watch it, and you'll see it's great. Thanks. That's it for the show. Thank you everybody for listening. You can follow us at Zeros on Heroes on all social media. If you're looking down at your podcast listening device and it says Apple on it, go to Apple Podcasts and write us a review. And you can like, share, and subscribe the podcast to all of your friends. Get everybody listening. And if you can think of ways to improve the show, let me know, and I'd be happy to take it under advisement. Maybe your idea becomes the next episode. Who knows? But you can follow me at Mike Mercadal on all social media. And remember to come out to the Thursday Unsung Heroes live at the Creek in the Cave in Long Island City, Queens. And you can be on this very podcast feed on our live show and talk about the topic of the day. Thank you all for listening. Guys, remember to go out and be heroic.